Why have women stopped dressing like women? It's one of the most revealing cultural questions of our time because it says less about fashion and more about identity, power, and the pressures shaping modern femininity. For centuries, women's style was defined by difference: the silhouette, the fabric, the codes of allure and refinement. Clothing was not just aesthetic, it was a language that communicated presence, mystery, and distinction. But over the past decades, that language has been diluted, even erased. One of the biggest reasons is the confusion between empowerment and imitation. Somewhere along the line, society sold women the idea that to be powerful, they had to look less like women and more like men, sharper, boxier, stripped of softness. But power never comes from rejecting yourself. True power is when you amplify your essence, not when you erase it. Another reason is the rise of fast trends and performative dressing. Social media created aesthetics that reward shock, exaggeration, or irony, styles that flatten identity rather than deepen it. Many women no longer dress for their own story, they dress for the algorithm. And when you dress for performance, individuality is the first thing to disappear. There's also a cultural discomfort with femininity itself. Elegance, modesty, refinement, even sensuality in its subtle form. These qualities are often mocked as outdated or not progressive. So women are pushed into extremes, either hypersexualization on one side or neutered neutrality on the other. Both erase the quiet strength of true womanhood. But here's the deeper truth. When women stop dressing like women, the loss is not just aesthetic, it's psychological. Clothing is how you shape your aura, how you embody presence before you even speak. When style loses its feminine codes, women risk losing one of the most powerful tools they've ever had: the ability to influence through elegance, to command through mystery, to captivate without words. The reality is this: women haven't stopped dressing like women because femininity lost its value. They stopped because culture made them believe it did. But as fashion always reminds us, what disappears eventually returns. And the return of feminine dressing will not be about weakness. It will be about reclaiming what was always powerful: refinement, grace, restraint, and allure. Because at the end of the day, the world doesn't need women who look like diluted versions of men. It needs women who dress and live in a way that reminds everyone what true feminine power has always looked like. Another reason women stop dressing like women is the cultural obsession with convenience. Clothes today are marketed to be easy, quick, thoughtless, throw it on and go. But femininity has never been about shortcuts. It's about intention. The ritual of getting dressed, of choosing fabrics that flatter, of walking into a space with presence. That's where the power always lived. By stripping away the ritual, society stripped away the depth. We also need to talk about fear of judgment. Modern women are told that dressing elegantly, dressing with refinement makes them high maintenance, traditional, or even anti-feminist. And so to avoid criticism, many step back from embracing femininity in its fullest form. But in doing so, they give up one of the oldest languages of female authority, the power of appearance. Another layer is fashion's surrender to androgyny as default. While balance and experimentation have always existed, the pendulum swung so far toward neutrality that difference itself became unfashionable. Women stopped dressing like women because fashion stopped celebrating what was uniquely feminine. But sameness is not liberation, it's erasure. And beneath all this lies the deeper psychology of self-worth. Dressing like a woman means knowing your value enough to refine it, to highlight it, to express it. But a culture that convinces women to settle in relationships, in careers, in identity, also convinces them to settle in style. If you don't know your worth, you won't demand beauty in how you present yourself. The irony is that the very traits women were told to abandon, elegance, restraint, softness, mystery, are the ones that historically gave them the most influence. These qualities didn't limit women, they amplified them. They created presence without noise, allure without exposure, power without aggression. This is why the return to dressing like women is inevitable, because femininity is not fragile, it's timeless, and every cultural cycle eventually comes back to what works, what endures, what captivates. When women embrace dressing like women again, it won't be about going backward, it will be about moving forward with clarity, reclaiming a way of being that culture tried to erase. and proving that true femininity was never weakness. It was always the strongest card in the deck. When you look at the history of fashion, you can trace exactly when women began to step away from dressing like women. The post-war years of the 1940s and 50s gave rise to the new look: cinched waists, full skirts, silhouettes that celebrated the female form. It was unapologetically feminine, and it became iconic. But by the late 1960s and 70s, fashion shifted. Women entered the workforce in larger numbers, and style began to mirror that change. The rise of power suits, sharp tailoring, and boxy lines gave women access to the uniform of authority. But authority was borrowed from men's codes, not built from women's. In the 1990s, minimalism stripped femininity even further. Neutral palettes, straight cuts, and the heroine chic aesthetic erased softness and curves. Dressing like a woman was equated with vulnerability, and fashion taught women to value cool detachment over elegance. Then came the 2000s, where hypersexualization swung the pendulum the other way. Femininity became exaggerated, almost cartoonish. Think bodycon everything, low-rise extremes, logos plastered across the body. Again, not true femininity, but performance. What we're seeing now in fall 2025 is the aftermath of decades of pendulum swings. Women stopped dressing like women because fashion rarely gave them the middle ground: authentic femininity. The industry offered either masculine imitation, ironic neutrality, or hypersexual costume, but rarely elegance, restraint, and timeless allure. This is why the quiet return of elegance in recent seasons matters. Brands like Ralph Lauren, Dior under Jonathan Anderson, and even Michael Ryder's Celine are hinting at a recentering of style on codes of refinement: fluidity, balance, harmony, and depth. Fashion insiders know that cultural hunger is shifting. Women are beginning to crave wardrobes that reflect both authority and femininity, not as contradictions, but as complements. And here's the knowledge few people will say out loud: true feminine dressing has always been about psychology, not fabric. A cinched waist or a flowing silhouette matters less than the aura it creates, the atmosphere of allure, of distinction, of authority rooted in mystery. That's why women who dress with elegance always stand apart. Their clothes aren't just beautiful, they're strategic. Women stopped dressing like women because fashion lost the courage to celebrate them. But the cycle is turning. Fall 2025 signals a return, not to the past, but to the essence. Femininity is being rewritten, not erased, and the women who understand this shift will lead culture into its next chapter of elegance. If we read fashion as a timeline, the erasure of feminine dressing becomes almost inevitable. Every decade since the mid-20th century has chipped away at it, either by replacing it with masculine codes of power or diluting it into ironic neutrality. What was once the central language of women's style, refinement, elegance, the celebration of difference, was treated as outdated, even embarrassing. Look at the runway archives. In the 1980s, power dressing gave women sharp shoulders and pinstripes to compete with men. In the 1990s, minimalism flattened silhouettes until individuality disappeared. By the 2000s, femininity was pushed into parody, overly sexual, excessively revealing, or reduced to novelty logos. And in the 2010s and early 2020s, androgyny became the high fashion standard. What did all of this have in common? None of it was about women as women. It was about women performing something else: toughness, irony, sexuality, or sameness. That is why fall 2025 feels so crucial. The pendulum is swinging again, and this time it's swinging back toward femininity as strength. We see heritage houses quietly bringing back softness with structure, allure with intelligence, romance with restraint. Not a naive femininity, not a caricatured sexuality, but a considered, dignified, almost architectural femininity that reclaims elegance as modern power. The insider truth is this: fashion is realizing that the most enduring codes have always been feminine codes, not because they're delicate, but because they're timeless. Silhouettes that respect proportion, fabrics that enhance presence, colors that radiate authority through subtlety. These are not seasonal tricks. They're the DNA of style itself. And what's returning now is the psychological power of dressing like a woman. Fashion is remembering that allure doesn't come from imitation or exaggeration. It comes from balance. the ability to captivate without chaos, to command without shouting, to embody power without rejecting grace. So the real answer to why women stopped dressing like women? Because culture tried to convince them femininity wasn't enough. But fashion is already correcting that mistake. The return of feminine dressing in 2025 is not nostalgia, it's evolution. It's proof that refinement, restraint, and mystery are not relics of the past, but the future of elegance. This is the moment we find ourselves in now, a turning point. For years, women were told that dressing like women made them weak, outdated, or less powerful. But power never came from copying men or from dissolving into neutrality. Power has always been in owning what makes you distinct. Fashion is finally beginning to remember that. The elegance of proportion, the quiet authority of restraint, the intrigue of mystery, these are not relics, they are strategies. Dressing like a woman was never about fragility, it was about refinement. It was about creating presence so magnetic that nothing louder could compete. When women reclaim this, they reclaim more than style. They reclaim identity. They reclaim the ability to command without raising their voice. They remind the world that femininity has never been something to hide, but something to elevate. Because in the end, what history always proves is this. Fashion can abandon femininity for a time, but it always comes back. Why? Because elegance never dies. And the women who choose to embody it shape not just trends, but culture itself. And that is why the return of feminine dressing feels inevitable. The world is restless, saturated with noise, with chaos, with sameness. In that climate, femininity stands out precisely because it is disciplined, intentional, and unapologetically distinct. When a woman dresses like a woman, she is not competing, she is not chasing, she is not proving, she is defining. And that definition carries a power that cannot be replicated by imitation or erased by irony. It's the kind of presence that lingers long after she has left the room. This is the truth. Fashion is circling back to. The strongest statements are often the most subtle, the most elegant, the most composed. That is why femininity, once dismissed, is now re-emerging as the new face of modern strength. Women stopped dressing like women because culture convinced them to forget the weight of their own power. But the moment they remember, the moment they reclaim elegance as not weakness but weapon, everything changes. And that shift is already happening. Fall 2025 isn't just a season of fashion. It's a reminder, a correction, a return. The age of apology is over. The era of feminine power, written once again in fabric, in proportion, in presence, is only beginning.